Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, maybe even a happy new year to you, depending on when you're listening to this. We're recording this on New Year's Eve morning. John Buzby along with Marty Sheehan, and we've missed being on the air, Marty. We talked about that. I think we've been off for maybe 2 weeks now.
We're both jonesing for it, yeah.
And I texted Marty the other day, and I said, hey, let's do a top 10. Let's get back on the air. And so we had told people we would be on the air when there was football news. And there really isn't any football news yet. There's 3 coaching vacancies. We'll talk about that in a minute. And none have been filled, and none are going to be filled till toward the end of January.
Yep.
And so that would have been the only news. Nothing else really earth shattering that we didn't already talk about on our last podcast the day after the state championship games. But we thought, you know what? Why not? Let's put a top 10 together. And we put a top 10 together. It was funny. We each threw in 5 things, or maybe it was 6 and 4. I forget what it was.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And we both agreed on all of them. There was only a couple stories that we mulled over about maybe this should be in there, maybe not. And we agreed, you know what? It wasn't on our first blanch, so why not?
And we decided to keep it as positive
Yes.
as we could.
Yeah.
With basically one exception, really. Is it all positive?
Yeah. And the one exception is not going to offend anybody.
No.
So that's, that's the thing. And so we just thought, let's put together a top 10. And so we'd be interested in your thoughts, and we hope it generates some conversation on Twitter and Facebook. And so, remember, you can tweet us at DELHS Football, and Facebook, same thing. And so we hope you do so, and we hope you'll share any football news you hear about. And so without further ado, the top 10 sports stories related to Delaware High School football. And that's our show. That's our podcast. And so we limited it to that. So if there's a big basketball story, you're not going to hear about it here. Big soccer story, same thing. This is all about Delaware High School football. And this is in no particular order. And so what we kind of tried to do almost inadvertently, but then I think it worked out. We started at the start of the season. And that's where story number 1 comes from. And that was a season that wasn't for the AI DuPont Tigers. And Marty, the first thing I did when we decided to do this, and we picked this as a story, I went back and looked at the last 3 years of AI DuPont's records. And I'm sure you did the same.
Yep.
But 2019, they were 8-2. They had 39 people on their roster. Now that number can be correct. It can be too many, it can be not enough, but it's close. The rosters that end up on websites for sports are pretty accurate. 2020, they dropped to 21 people. That's 18 down. Now, again, this was still when we were battling COVID.
Yep.
The 2019 year was the season before COVID hit. Fall of 2020 was when we were coming out of COVID, but there were still masks. I believe that was the season they wore masks, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe it was, yes. Yep.
And so there was that issue. Probably some parents didn't let their kids play. But anyway, they were down to 21. They had to forfeit their final 3 games. They didn't get through the season. Fast forward to 2021. They also forfeited the final 3 games of the season. They ended up 2-8. They did get 2 wins that season, but they had 20 on their roster. And so you're basically you're down to where everybody's playing both sides of the ball practically. Yep. When it's all said and done, or certainly if you're not playing both sides of the ball, you're playing on special teams. And then fast forward to 2022, and I forget the exact timing. It was a couple weeks. I think they were 10 days into preseason. Marty, you probably have a better idea about that.
It was pretty late in the process. They were trying to, the entire time, they were trying to pull something together. And I was actually in touch with one of the administrators there, and they kept saying, look, we're trying. We have, on certain days, we have plenty of kids, but on other days we have single digit kids, right? Because they even went to the extent of busing kids in who couldn't, didn't have parents who were working or whatever, who couldn't get the kids to practice. So AI really went all out trying to get this to happen. And in the end, just numbers just weren't there.
And it was all done for safety. The decision was, they weren't worried about what their record was going to be. It wasn't like, oh, we can't do this, we're not going to win a game. It was, we can't do this, kids are going to get hurt.
And they had asked to drop to 1A
Yep.
prior to this, and DIAA did not do that because they had said it would be a 2-year process, right? And they weren't going to do anything in the interim. So, which was fair, I thought.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And if you have to drop for the season, you drop for the season, and that's exactly what they did.
Yep.
They dropped for the season. And this is something. So they're going to drop to District 1. They did get that approved for Class 1, District 1 in Class 1. And also playing for the first time is going to be at Class 1 is going to be Glasgow and McCain. And so I just went through real quick, Marty, so here's the 8 teams in class 1: AI, Christiana, Dickinson, Glasgow, McCain, St. Elizabeth, Tatnall, Charter School of Wilmington. I think AI, Christiana, Dickinson, Glasgow, and McCain are all going to beat up on each other. And
Yep.
I say beat up, meaning they're going to win some, they're
It's
going to
going to
lose
be
some.
competitive.
It's going to be
Yes.
competitive like
Yep.
it should be. I
Yep.
still think St. E's, Tatnall, and Charter of Wilmington are probably a little bit above the rest of the pack,
Yeah.
but there's that situation in every class. So
Yep.
AI is where it's at. And, you and I have talked both on the podcast and off the air. It's important for these teams, just as it is for Caesar Rodney and for Hodson and for William Penn and ones in class 2 as well, to be put in a position to win some games. Otherwise, their rosters are never going to get bigger. Right now, who's transferring into AI to play football? Nobody. And if you're a football player and mom and dad say, hey, we got good news, we're moving into the Red Clay School District, you're going to AI.
Yeah.
Red flags go up everywhere.
Yep.
And that's not just the case in AI. We're just using AI as an example because that's what we're talking about right now. And it's nothing against AI. It's a very good school. Used to be one of the top schools in the canal. And that's the sad part of this story. I remember when I started writing for the Newark Post, and I'm going to date myself, and the date's going to be a guess, 15 years ago. AI was undefeated. They had that quarterback who went on to play safety at Boston College. I can't remember his name. And they played St. Mark's. AI was supposed to win the Division I football state championship that year. I think it was Division I. If it wasn't, it was Division II, but I'm pretty sure they were still Division I then. And that's where they were 15 years ago. And then fast forward 15 years and they have to forfeit the season, basically.
Yeah.
They didn't forfeit the season. They didn't have a team. So school choices hurt them. Charter schools have hurt, and private schools that I think have created more opportunities and ways for parents to be able to afford to go to private school, not because they're athletes, but they've done it for non-athletes too. And so I think that has hurt AI. And so I think that's why it's critical that every 2 years they do reevaluate where these schools should be playing, because, if AI can be 4-6 this year, maybe even 3-7 and finish the season, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
That is huge.
And just, going back even 1 year further than you did, if you go to 2018, they were 9-0 and they were the number 1 seed in the Division II playoffs.
Yep.
They got knocked off by Tower Hill in the first round, but I mean, this is a program that was good. And it's funny, you just, as you're saying those names, AI, Christiana, Glasgow, Brandywine. If you go back, which I often do because I'm like that, to the News Journal archives and look at the 80s and 90s, those schools were always near or in the top 10.
Yeah.
And the public schools have just been killed by the private schools, the charters, the schools like Conrad, which are kind of or AI DuPont, or excuse me, DMA, which is kind of a hybrid of things. But yeah, it's so rough on these schools. And part of this AI story that turned out to be really good, really cool, was McCain coming to the rescue and allowing the AI kids, the seniors, to transfer into their program, not to their school, but to the program to play. And a huge shout out to McCain and for the AI leadership to work that out, because some of these kids, that it was their senior years and they weren't going to get to play anywhere because of the rules dictating transfers at that point. These kids were allowed to play, and DIAA rushed this through immediately, which was great to get these kids on the roster as soon as possible. And it turned out to be a good season for some of these kids. McCain, surprisingly, they were one of those teams, got out to a 3-0 start, and they were one of the good stories of the season. But yeah, it worked out for some of these kids. And AI did field a JV team this year. They did go 2-4. So at least they had kids playing, they had kids in the program. So hopefully, and I believe Coach Marcus Heyman is still going to be there. He was named the new coach, and then of course they canceled the season. So hopefully he's going to be able to keep these JV kids in the program, and they'll get up to a level where, as you said too, moving to 1A, when they look at the schedule and see, okay, you know what, we can compete with some of these teams, whereas we were going to get destroyed at the 2A level. So hopefully that will resuscitate this program, because it's been a good story for a long time.
Yeah, it has. It's been a great story. Their band was always the story.
Yes.
And then their football team caught up to be the story. And then it's just gone. Everything's spiraled downward for all the reasons we mentioned. Nothing against the school. And they're obviously not the only school in that situation.
No.
It's just a reality of the day. That's the day and age we live in. And that's not going to change. We can say how much we don't like it, but it's not going to change. So, all right, that's story number one. Story number two. is the one that might be sort of considered negative, but again, it's not negative against anybody. And that's the schedules that were altered throughout the season because of incidents that happened off the field, on the field, after the games on the field, and the referee shortage, all of which are situations. And before I forget, I want to mention Bob Collins, who is the president of the NDFOA, asked us to shout out about, hey, now's the time. If you want to be a referee next year, classes are starting in mid-February. You can go to their website, which is www.ndfoa.org, and sign up for them. And whether you're interested in being on the field or being a clock operator, being a varsity or what they call a sub-varsity level referee, there's an opportunity. And it was great last year, Marty. We saw some women on the sidelines for the first time that I remember. Now, I'm not at every game, and I don't watch every game on tape anymore.
I agree. I hadn't seen many.
Yeah, so that was great to see.
So,
so that was great to see. Right now, and these salaries are probably all going to go up. I can't promise that because they're under negotiation. Varsity referees made $84. If you were the clock operator up in the press box, $58. And then if you were considered sub-varsity, which would be JV, freshman, any middle school games, it was $58. And that's because the games are shorter, a lot less pressure. You know, I mean, parents are still wacky, I'm sure, but it's not the pressure of doing a varsity game.
Right.
So again, if you're interested, go to the website, www.ndfoa.org. That's the upstate website. They need officials downstate too. And so, you know, it's the Delmarva, I forget it's the NDSOA, the ND something. You can Google close. Google downstate referees, and they need refs down there as well. So anyway, so it was the referee shortage. That was a big part of the schedule changes. I remember being at William Penn, texting you, Marty, say, hey, the game just got postponed an hour because they're waiting for the referees to come from a Del Castle game, you know, right down the street, but didn't end when it was supposed to, type of thing. So that was a big thing. The other thing was the incidents. Started out when I was on the sideline at the St. Mark's Apple game to start the season, and I started getting text messages that a gun had gone off at Abyssinia Stadium at the Howard DMA game. Don't want to go into all those details. Everybody's very familiar with that. And then you had the gunshot incident at Appoquinimink High School, which ended up having nothing to do with the game, other than the fact there was a game going on. And the incident happened technically outside of the campus, but right there. And I was at that game when that was all going on. And then there was the handshake incident at a couple different places. Again, not going to regurgitate all that, but it was a season, Marty, where I still remember we got on the air maybe 3 times the whole year where there wasn't an incident of some sort to talk about. And we kind of joked about that, but this was, and these are things that, you know, certainly you hope the gun type stuff, the violence stuff ends and stops. What's the answer to that? A lot of answers. What's realistic, I'm not sure.
Exactly.
But the referee shortage, you know, that we need more refs. That's the bottom line. And more important, we need the parents to leave the refs alone. And the coaches too, to let the refs ref, and they're going to make mistakes. That's the reality of it. They make mistakes in the NFL. That's the reality of it.
There was we had the DMA Howard game, which, as it turned out, from everything we read, everything we heard, was not the fan base of either team that started this. It was just kids who were there and started trouble with one another. We heard an incident at Brandywine a couple weeks later, and it was the same thing. It turned out to be just kids who were there, not affiliated with either team, and just starting trouble. And they really started to change some of these games to earlier, trying to get them in before dark hit in. And I guess if I would something I would wish for the new year for football would be for the parents and the coaches just to ease up a bit on the referees and realize that without them, these games can't happen. Some games were played with 5 referees instead of 6, and people would complain about missed calls here and there. Although I'll be honest, I didn't hear a lot of complaining this year about the officials on social media. It seems to just be the parents and the coaches at the games. So, coaches, fans, let these guys do their jobs. I'd say one thing about watching the World Cup this year. Boy, the players don't get away with anything from the referees. No. If they give any lip whatsoever, I love the referee will put their finger up like near their mouth, be like, look, that's it. Right. Not another word, or you're getting a card, Right. I would love to see referees have a little more discretion to do that kind of thing. I think they did a great job this year with managing the personal foul situations. They got in between guys very quickly. I thought they tried to diffuse with penalties by throwing the penalty flag. Mm-hmm. I thought they diffused a lot of these things that could get worse. We always see, in the NFL, you see all this pushing and shoving and there's no flags, and all of a sudden later in the game, there's a big brawl. So I thought they did a great job with that. But yeah, we did see, and this was not Delaware just only. I remember the podcast we did where I was saying somewhat 60% of Alabama games had been changed from Friday nights, which is a huge deal in Alabama, to Thursday nights. And
Right.
people were complaining, but it was because the same thing. They did not have the referees to cover those games. And then the first time I really heard it come to a head here was when you texted me at Middletown or William Penn and said, "Hey, this is not happening right now."
I'm here an hour early.
Yeah, because another game went a little bit later, so these guys are having a hard time getting here. So, yeah, anybody who's interested, and this goes for moms, dads, anyone out there who wants to be an official, face it, you're going to deal with some stuff, but hopefully that stuff is brought to a minimum. I remember talking about last year where there were coaches and parents confronting officials in the parking lot after the game. And these officials at some point, people wonder why when the game's over, these guys sprint off the field. That's
Right.
why they
It's
want
for
to
their
get in their
safety.
cars and
Yeah.
get exactly. They
Yep.
want to get in their cars and get out of there. And it used to be, there would be occasions. I remember basketball and football games when I was in high school where, the referees would hang around, coaches would shake their hands,
Mhm.
players would shake their hands, things like that. But now they just want to get out of Dodge, and you can't blame them because there's so much confrontation and so much, kids can't do anything wrong. It's got to
Right.
be the officials no matter
Yeah.
what happens. So, but hopefully Bob Collins and these guys can get the numbers up. And as you said, there's a great opportunity. I mean, they're going to beggars can't be choosers. So if you're interested in doing a certain thing or certain job within the referee business, so to speak, they'll find a place for you.
Right.
They need all the help they can get.
Yeah.
So I hope that improves. And next year we get back to our normal schedule of, our Friday night games where there is no I almost like hooliganism, I would call it, the kids
Right.
that are there to cause trouble. And I know a lot of people have said, and some of the schools have said, well, bring in more police officers. Well, that's great, except that costs money. And
Right.
one thing these public schools don't have is money.
Money. Yep. Yeah.
So, as you said, there's all kinds of answers out there.
Yeah.
The question is, what are feasible answers and realistic answers? And, who knows at this point?
All right. And it's the Delmar Football Officials Association. I did look that up. I knew it was DFOA and I couldn't remember what, and I knew it wasn't Delaware. It's Delmarva Football Officials Association. But one other thing, Marty, that's probably not going to change is there's some rivalry games that switched their schedules from Friday to Saturday because of hooliganism, as you call it. And in some cases, it was once this hooliganism seemed to become a little bit of a trend early in the season, they did it to prevent rather than to wait and see it happen.
Yes.
And so I think there's some rivalry games. I think you've seen the last Appo Middletown night game just because of what that's, again, even though there was the gun incident had nothing to do with the football game, there was that, it was enough of a scare that why are we having this game at night when we can do it tomorrow at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock? And it doesn't impact anything. And so we've already seen the Dover Caesar Rodney game. That's been moved to a Saturday the last 2 years, I think it's been now. And so it's going to be interesting to see, will Howard play any night games at Abyssinia Stadium? Not because it's Howard, because it's a public school game, which let's face it, that's the stereotype. Not of people or anything, but just the stereotype is if it's two public schools playing at night, there's a greater chance of something happening than if it's two private schools. And that's not fair, but we're just being honest.
No, that's the truth.
We can lie and say that's not the case, but that is the case. And so it'll be interesting to see.
It's why private schools play basketball games at 7:30 at night, and the public schools all start at 5:15.
Exactly. Sally's plays at 7:30. Sally's plays at 7:30. So
and so does St. Elizabeth, so does Caravel. All the public schools, they start at like 5:15 and 5:30. I remember you and I used to remember, we had to leave work early or whatever to get up to the games we were doing the public schools because they did start so early.
And it's nothing against public schools. I went to public school. My kids go to public school, and that's just the reality of it. That's the stereotype, or that's just the way it is. And so it'll be interesting to see going into the year. Some of these adjustments we talked about were made during the year.
Yes, proactively.
It was proactively. There was one downstate, I forget which one it was, where they actually changed the game and didn't allow fans in.
Yes.
Well, it was a Laurel Seaford. Was it Laurel Seaford?
I believe it was.
I think it was Laurel Seaford. Yeah. So again, so anyway, the reality of it is, without spending any more time on this, that's a top story from this year because it's probably going to flow into next year, both with the referee shortage and with the schedules being altered. All right. Number 3, field goal kickers.
Man.
And when is the last time field goal kickers in general were a top story in anybody's top 10 at any level of high school sports? But it is here. We talked about a field goal kicker, it seemed like every single week.
Yep.
The one name I'm going to throw out, and I know you got more to throw out, is James Collins.
Yes.
You know, right off the bat, he kind of separated himself from everybody else. But then the reality of what happened is there were others who were, if not as effective as him, were pretty darn close and more effective than any time since we've been doing this, Marty. And you've been in Delaware your whole life.
Yep.
I've been covering high school sports now for about 15 years, and we've never had a football season where there have been so many kickers. And I don't mean 50 kickers,
right?
But there have been more than 3 kickers, more than, 2 kickers in some cases,
yep,
who not only consistently kicked point after touchdowns, the extra points, but field goals.
Yeah.
And not chip shot field goals, long field goals. And so it was a great season for field goal kickers. And so that's our top story, number 3, again, in no particular order.
I put out kind of a call to arms with a call to legs. I asked people to give me the kickers in case we missed any. Some coaches didn't have stats and whatnot. So we got, first of all, Mike Gonzalez Perez from Laurel. This was great because Joey Jones sent this to us and said 71 for 78 this year on PATs. And he scored 80 points, which was 1 more point than the Laurel defense had allowed, which was just incredible. He'd outscored their opponents. Sam Crossan at Red Lion, 33 of 36 on point after touchdowns. He had a 46-yard field goal. He had that great one we highlighted that bounced off the crossbar and went over in that terrible weather condition. Chris Albero, who did everything for Archmere, including kicking, 30 of 32 on PATs and 3 of 3 on field goals. James Collins, 15 of 20, 15 field goals he kicked this year,
Man.
Along of 46. He had 31 touchbacks. He was 27 of 27 on point after touchdowns. Just kind of funny. He had 15 field goals and 27 extra points. Sally's offense did struggle at times, and he was the guy who would come in and fix it.
He won the one game for him.
Yes, he did.
I forget which game it was, but if he doesn't kick
the
any
first
field goals,
9 points of the game, and it ended up being the difference. He had 72 points. Ibrahim Leva Fajako of Sussex Central, 32 of 35 point after touchdowns. Logan Keld of Caravel, 41 of 43 on PATs, 2 of 2 on field goals. Daniel Shannon from St. Mark's, 40 of 43 on point after touchdowns. Wilson Ingursky from Cape Henlopen, who I'd never heard of, 31 of 31 on PATs. It's just incredible. Cole Soto from St. Elizabeth's, the finalist in 1A, 35 of 42 on PATs, the quarterback. So there was a ton of guys we really never saw. And by the way, there's others I'm sure that I don't know about or forgotten, but to all the kickers this year, great job. Because I mean, it's one thing. I remember so many games growing up in Delaware. And then when I was in high school and following it after, every touchdown would be 6 points and that was it. You were lucky if you ever got a 7th point. Most teams went for 2 all the time.
Right. Yep.
Which is what Smyrna still does with incredible success.
They do it very successful. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Who needs a kicker when you can score 2 points every time? Yeah. So just a phenomenal year for kickers in the first 8. And to all these guys and the ones I left out, kudos. You did a fantastic job. And
some of those kickers are soccer players who are boys and soccer players who are girls. But a lot of them are not. And that's kind of the cool thing too. There's a lot of times you'd see these PAT kickers that were so effective and they have no interest in playing football at the next level. They play soccer, and there are still some that do that, but there are a lot who don't. And that's kind of cool to see that the kicking game is, found a place in Delaware, and that the coaching staffs are taking advantage of that and not just automatically going for 2. So field goal kickers are number 3 story of 2022. All right. Number 4 story is the 2 Class 3A surprises, starting with Appoquinimink winning the Class 3A Division I title. And I think the shock of that, Marty, is not that Appo won. It's that Middletown didn't.
Yes.
Number 1. And it's the way that it won, because Sally's, Appoquinimink, and Middletown were all 4-1 at the end of the season. And so it went to a 3-way tiebreaker, which is basically points allowed in district games. And so Appo won. Yep. And I remember after the Appo game, heading into the Sally's game, Middletown played Sally's the last game of the season. One of the players, who's a neighbor of mine, told me that, hey, if we give up less than so many points
Yeah.
and beat Sally's, we're going to win the championship.
And I had put that on Twitter. I said, if they win this game and give up this few points, they're going to be the 3A, Division I champions.
And when he
or District 1, excuse me.
And when he told me that, coming off the field of the Appo game that night, I was coming out of the press box. He was coming off the field. That can't possibly be right because Sally's and Middletown are both in that division. But
yes,
sure enough, it worked out. And Coach Brian Timpson was named Coach of the Year. Daniel McConomy not only got nickname of the year, Run DMC, at least in our book, but was the offensive player of the year. And Esias Guthrie was the lineman of the year. And so it's not a shock that they won it, I guess.
That's right.
But
Elijah Husser.
I'm sorry.
Yep,
I said, yeah, Elijah Husser. I wrote Guthrie.
Esias Guthrie's been in the news a lot lately. Right. Transferred to Jackson State. This was a great story. Brian Timpson, in the 2 years that this district system has existed, he's been the 3A Division I Coach of the Year both times.
Yeah.
So, and this year it was clear. I mean, with their win over Sally's, which was great, their defense was one of the best in the state. McConomy was phenomenal all season. We said this every week. Every team knows he's getting the ball in nearly every play. And they still couldn't stop him. And then you had the emergence of the freshman quarterback, Greg Nielsen. Mm-hmm. You had Noah Hoff start to assert himself as a wide receiver over the last 6-7 games of the season. Their defense, again, was just phenomenal all year long. And you look up and there they are. They're all of a sudden the number 2 seed in the playoffs, and just a great accomplishment for that program, which has always been sort of the sad stepsister to Middletown.
Right.
I remember,
which is where Timpson comes from. He was an assistant coach at Middletown. For those that don't know that.
And it was a crazy tiebreaker. The first one was head to head, which of course was all, the teams had all beaten each other. And then I think it went down 2 more before you got to the points given up. And there you had it. Appo was the champion. So just a great story for those kids. And that is a really competitive district, District 1. And, we'll talk about somebody who's going to be added to that district next year a little bit later. But great accomplishment for Appo and Coach Brian Timpson.
All right. So the other surprise in that district was Dover being in the title game, not in that district, in that class, in just the second year under Chip Knapp. They started out 0-1 playing Arundel High School. And as Marty pointed out, they need to do that every year because then they go on a run. They won 5 straight wins, but then they lost 3 out of 4. And so during that 5 straight wins, everybody was like, you know what? Dover's for real. Dover's for real. They're going to be in that title game. And then they lost 3 of the last 4, and they really dropped off the map. They dropped out of sight. And maybe that's what Chip Knapp wanted. And maybe that's the approach they took every game of the playoffs when they beat Sussex Central 20-0. They beat St. George's 42-14. And then they lost to Smyrna 52-7, like anybody would have.
Yep.
And so just a phenomenal turnaround of the Dover program, Marty, which really hasn't been, again, we talk about how long we've been doing this. You've been here forever. I'm been here 15 years. They haven't been relevant in the 15 years that I've been here. And they've had some promising opportunities but you never thought of them as, hey, they got a shot to win the state championship.
No, you're right.
This year you thought that. And if you take Smyrna out of the picture, they very well may have been crowned the state champions. But it's been a great turnaround for Chip Knapp.
It has. I mean, this is, again, only second year, as you said, and they're in the title game. Now, we'd be remiss if we didn't say that they did benefit from the fact that Sally's, Middletown, and Appo all got thrown into the top bracket of the state tournament because of, and it was due to Middletown's out-of-state schedule that kind of screwed up the standings a little bit. But you can't fault what they did in the playoffs. Again, like you said, they kind of became an afterthought. They went on that run after Arundel, and we thought, okay, this is going to be a good season. And they ran into some rough patches. But boy, they had some amazing talent. Naseem Cosme, the quarterback, and I said this at the beginning of the season. He, John Parker, wide receiver, and Jaquan Kilby at running back were probably the quickest, fastest threesome and one of the most explosive threesomes in any backfield in Delaware. And of course, one of the big stories within the story is Jaquan Kilby, who'd been battling injuries all year, was not able to go in the title game, which really, at the outset, I'm sure that was a deflating thing for Dover. And, when you're playing the best team in the state by far, it's so hard to recover from that. But an amazing season for them, and so much for Coach Knapp to build on now from this point forward, because boy, can he sell that program to kids now, that the 8th graders that want to come to Dover. So and a great season for Coach Chip Knapp and the Senators.
It's also, Chip Knapp coming from the college level. He, of course, coached at Wesley College till that program folded. And people always wonder, can a college coach, are they really going to be interested in coming and doing a high school thing? And he was. And
he totally embraced it. Yeah.
And it's also opened up the opportunity, maybe Rod Milstead, who got let go by Delaware State this year, maybe poking around to possibly coach in one of the openings that are
we
here
both
in
heard
Delaware.
rumors that he's been poking around in the high school circles. So we'll see. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, it would be.
Super Bowl champion, a guy who I was shocked got fired from Del State, frankly.
Well, as somebody said, they've been through so many coaches. Maybe it's not the coaching situation that's the problem there.
That's kind of where I was going. It's a culture problem there. It's the embracing the football program, but hopefully new coach Lee Hall will get that on track. But for Chip Knapp, who probably had opportunities, I'm guessing, other places too, for guys successful as he's been, to come to Dover and lend his expertise to that program and get them to the title game in only his second season is a remarkable accomplishment.
I'm sure Delaware State, which is where the Wesley College program folded into, would have scooped him up in a heartbeat. Maybe not as a head coach, but as an assistant coach.
I think a lot of people thought that. Yeah.
So, and I think he might have made the wise decision, at least at the time. He was in a state championship game 2 years later. That wasn't happening at Del State. So, all right. Story number 5 is the unified championship game. 4 games on championship Saturday, division, class 1, 2, and 3. But the unified game capped it off. If you're not familiar, unified sports is kids with and without disabilities playing on the same team in flag football. Under the umbrella of the Delaware Interscholastic Athletic Association. It's an official sport, just like basketball is and track and field also for unified. And this game went to overtime, Marty, which was wonderful for unified sports, wonderful for the fans in attendance. The IAA was a little iffy because now we've got to extend this day a little bit. That's already too long. But the reality of it is the 6 o'clock game kicked off right at 6 o'clock and could have kicked off earlier than that if they chose to do that.
Time to kill.
It didn't impact anything. So I say that in jest. The reality was I was talking, I was on the sideline with Donna Polk and Jed Bell, and they were both very excited that this game went to overtime. And what happens in overtime in the unified sports, and it was 52-52. So it was a high scoring game. There were a lot of points scored in the fourth quarter. Is each team is given 4 downs. They start at midfield. You get 4 downs to go into the end zone. So it's very similar to the 10-yard thing in tackle football. The difference is if you don't score, your yardage is counted. And so Caesar Rodney got the ball first, could only move the ball 4 yards. And so Newark Charter's thinking, wow, and flag football, 4 yards is nothing. And that's why they have this overtime rule. You can score touchdowns in flag football all afternoon. Right. And that 6 o'clock game would have started at 3 a.m. And so they, Newark Charter Caesar Rodney got the ball, only 4 yards. Newark Charter chomping at the bits. And I was on the Newark Charter sideline, and they were all excited that, hey, guys, we only got to go 4 yards. Well, they went backwards, and unfortunately. And so hats off. And it wasn't a lack of execution. It was an incredible job by the Caesar Rodney defense. Head coach Sky Barrs had a perfect plan, or whoever her defensive coordinator is had a perfect plan in place, and they just were not able to pick up any yardage. They went backwards, and Caesar Rodney wins its first football state championship. Newark Charter won the first 2 back almost a decade ago. And so it was exciting for Caesar Rodney to experience, and they were the favorite. They were the favorites coming in. And that, everybody who follows unified sports thought that they had the best roster, not necessarily the top players over everybody, but they were deep. And they had some of the top players, there's no doubt. So that was a great game.
And we'll have to publicize the overtime rules later next year when we get near the tournament, because I was one of the people at home with their hands up in the air going, wait, what just happened? Why is Caesar Rodney going crazy? Nobody scored. Until I got a text from you telling me what exactly happened there. So in the absence of announcers, it was difficult to ascertain what was happening there. So we'll point that out as we get closer to the state tournament next year. But a great accomplishment, especially for Caesar Rodney football program overall that has struggled so much recently. It's pretty cool to bring home a state title no matter what division or class it is. So kudos to the Caesar Rodney kids for a great season.
Yeah, it really was. So that was our story number 5. All right, story number 6 was down to class 1 with Laurel's domination. Since this class system has come about, they've played 2 years. They've won 2 titles. They've only lost twice in the regular season, and that was last year to Woodbridge, 6-0, and to Delmar 24-21. So those could have easily been flipped.
Both class 2 losses, by the way.
Right. Good point. Yes, very good point. And so their scoring here in 2021, their tournament scores were 110-14, and in 2022 It was 118-34. And so, Marty, this is a team that was a no-brainer. You're moving up.
Yep.
And so, there was only a handful of teams that moved up. We'll talk about a couple of them later, but this was one of them. And there really wasn't any argument to this because they're going to play in Class 2 in District 3 with Delmar, Lake Forest, Milford, Sussex Tech, and Woodbridge. Here were the scores this year for those games. They beat Delmar 42-13. They beat Sussex Tech 31-7, and they beat Woodbridge 42-0, moving up. So of the three teams that moved up, this one was the biggest no-brainer.
Yeah, there would have been an uproar had this not happened, I think, with the Class 1 team saying, oh, my God, please, not another year of this. In 2021, the average score of their games was 39-18. This year it was 44-7. They allowed 235 points defensively in 2021. They allowed 92, including the playoffs, in 2022. So the domination was incredible. Again, 24-2. Their only two losses were to Class 2 teams. They ended up having a winning record against Class 2 teams thanks to what they did this year. In those 26 games, they had 8 shutouts, 16 times where they held opponents to under 10 points. And of course, they had Kylese Wilson, who was just phenomenal. A great game in the title game, 29 carries, 190 yards. Caden Shockley, who I believe was the division player of the year, the district player of the year. So just a ton of talent on that team. And Joey Jones has done a phenomenal job there. But this was what, as you said, this was for the committee that was reclassifying things. This was a no-brainer. The only question people had was, at the meeting, the DIA meeting was, well, why not? Why isn't St. Elizabeth's moving up? Why aren't some of these other teams? Well, because it's their formula, which kind of reminds me of the BCS, the old BCS in college football, where they throw all these numbers in and the formula they created spits it out. And the answers were the ones who got moved up. And Laurel, had they not been on that list, would have been outrageous. We knew they were going to be there. So as you said, I think they're going to jump right into the picture, in the playoff picture, obviously. And who knows, within a couple of years, once they're in this, they're contending for a state title. Would not surprise me one bit.
Without really knowing what they're bringing back next year, Marty, and having watched them this year a couple times on tape, and then I was at the championship game watching them from the sideline, I'm not convinced they wouldn't have been in the Final Four this year in Class 2, possibly in the championship game if the brackets had worked. I'm thinking if they play Wilmington Friends 3 times, they beat them at least once.
Yeah.
And could beat them twice. You don't know. And
no.
The point is they're going to fit right in.
Yes.
They're going to fit right in and contend not just for a playoff spot. That's not going to be the goal for them.
Yep.
The goal for St. Mark's that's moving up and Odessa that's moving up is going to be to get to the playoffs. That's not the goal for this Laurel team. This Laurel team's goal is going to go deep.
For Joey Jones, it's hard, too, to get your team motivated week after week when you're winning games by 40 points. Yeah. So coming back for a third year would have been, I imagine, that would have been a nightmare for him. I know you love to win games, but to keep kids motivated and keep coming into the program when this thing just seems to roll along by itself, this is a great move, and I'm looking forward to watching them in Class 2.
And Laurel's a school and a program, they don't lose kids to anywhere. They don't lose kids to charter schools. They don't lose kids to the Votech schools. They don't lose kids by school choice. If you can play football at Laurel, there's no other place to play down in Sussex County within a reasonable distance.
And it's one of the greatest Friday night experiences down there we've always heard. And those small town feels when they play down there, whether it's them or, Delmar or Woodbridge, whoever, the community aspect is so strong. So yeah, it's a great program, and it's going to be fun to see what they do at the next level.
All right, so that was our number 6 story. Our number 7 story is another domination, the Smyrna domination, and I'll let you cover most of the stats, Marty. 12-1, they only lost to Middletown on a last-second play where their defender slipped down. Could have gone either way. In their 3 tournament games, they outscored opponents 150-7. Just an unbelievable performance by a Smyrna team that started out a little slow and then just picked up the pace, and we started calling them Class 3 champions by about week 5 once their quarterback situation got settled in, and we just realized that there was not a weakness on that team. The only weakness would be the field goal kicker because they didn't have one, and they didn't use one. Right. They probably got somebody that could do it, but as you pointed out, they don't kick extra points. They never have since Mike Judy took over. So just a dominating performance this season for Smyrna. And I don't think it would have mattered, Marty, where Middletown fell in the playoffs. I think if Middletown and Smyrna have a rematch in that state championship game, I'm not saying Smyrna is going to running clock Middletown, but I think they would have beaten them pretty solidly compared to losing to them way back in week 2 or 3 in the Harvest Bowl.
And remember, we're talking about their lack of kicker. Josh Michael was one of the MVPs, their kicker of that championship game. His pooch kicks just confounded Dover the entire afternoon or entire evening. So it was great to see a different aspect of that team. But, I said it on Twitter at the end of the season and right before the end of the season was, Mike Marks and Mike Judy have done a phenomenal job with that offense, and they've just kind of revolutionized offense in Delaware. They went to that entire strategy of basically a Wildcat offense in their semifinal game, and then they get to the finals and it's something totally different. And you're like, oh my gosh, this team is just, no matter what they do.
Why would you change it now?
Yeah, exactly. Which is what I pointed out. And then of course they go out and they blow Middletown out of the water. So I have to issue my mea culpa, hey, you guys know what you're doing. I'm done picking on that anymore. So this was just absolutely dominating from these guys. You had 508 to 121 was the scoring difference this year. It was basically 40 points to 9 points every game. As you said, the playoffs 150 to 7. And this was something I wanted to point this out because we kind of lumped this into as the end of the Knight era, the Knight brothers that are now, there will be a Knightless Smyrna next season. I'm playing around on Twitter. I said they ought to rename their Friday night games, Friday Night Lights with a K instead of the N. But you had this is Wade, Will, Wayne, and Ymir scored 1,700, and this is Glenn Frazier, by the way, put this together. They scored 1,788 points, 226 touchdowns, and totaled 16,433 yards over their time in the Smyrna program. And this goes back to when Wade was there, which I believe it was around 2012 to maybe 2014. I think he was gone the year before Mike Judy took over. And of course, Wade was killed tragically a few years ago in a car accident. But the night tradition at Smyrna is just incredible. And you have now Ymir and Wayne at James Madison. Will is still in the transfer portal looking for a permanent home, hopefully. But this team is just, once they got past that Middletown game, and again, it was so they had the punt at the beginning of the game, that weird punt formation they do, that there was one blocked and it resulted in a touchdown for Middletown, and then the slip of the defensive back in the end zone. This very easily could have been an undefeated team. And once Brian Wright, after the first, I know he was shaky in that first game that they played out of state. I think it was Arundel that they played as well.
Yes.
After the second game, the game against Middletown, starting with that third week, man, he just seemed to find a rhythm with those guys, and he ran that offense like a pro the rest of the season, had a great year. Nolan Fretz did a great job in the title game. Their defense, my God, in the Mike Judy era, their defense has been phenomenal, which is funny because everybody goes back and looks at the beginning of when this started, and it all started with a 76-56 loss to Salesianum. And then you say, well, their defense, well, after that, their defense got really good. It was almost like, it was Mike Reeder who just ripped them from here to there in that game. But
Troy Reeder. Troy Reeder.
Yes, sorry, Troy Reeder. Yeah, there's so many readers all around. Mike Reeder's their dad.
They're like the Knights.
That's right. That's right. They their defense became their hallmark. So, as much as Letty Brown and Will Knight and those guys, and of course Nolan Henderson was there, and this program has just been dominant. But every year it seems to be Marks and Judy just seem to plug in these new kids, teach them the system, and once they have it down, and you can argue that, well, the Knights are uber talented. They are, but they're not the only kids that were performing on these teams. And they're not playing defense. As we know, Mike Judy is one of those, the only guy we know of that doesn't play guys on offense and defense. They're separated so they can be fresh. And so just everything he's done there has kind of turned to gold. 4 state titles. It's just been an amazing run for them. And I know Mike put out, and I can't find it right now, but I know Mike put out a kind of, summation of his time at Smyrna, and it's just amazing to see. If you get a chance for people, go on Twitter and take a look at this. It's just, he listed kind of his accomplishments while he's been at Smyrna, and it's just amazing to read the scoring, everything else that they've done and put together. And I wish I could find it, but I can't right now. But it's on his Twitter page, and it just wraps up everything they've been able to do in his tenure there, which is now 8 years, I believe. And he's not going anywhere, it doesn't look like. So
No.
expect this Smyrna team to keep coming back again and again. But this year was just utter domination. After that Middletown game, no one really came close to beating them. Dover gave it a good run. They got off to good starts
Yeah.
both times
Yep.
that they played them, but in the end, you just can't keep up with all the horses they had. And just an amazing season. So congratulations to everybody associated with the Smyrna program.
Yeah, 2 quick points. I realized when I mentioned earlier that it wouldn't have mattered if Middletown was in the state championship. I realized Smyrna handled Middletown very handily.
Yeah, 48 to nothing in the semifinals, right?
But sometimes the state championship teams play a little bit differently, both from a nerve standpoint and for a motivational standpoint.
Yes.
But I don't think it would have been a whole lot different if they
No, I agree.
faced in the championship like a lot of people thought they would way back, including us.
Yep.
My second point is, I would argue, Marty, you take Ymir Knight off that Smyrna team, they're still state champions.
Oh, I don't disagree. I think they had so much talent going for them. Yeah, I agree. This wasn't, as I said, this wasn't just a Will or a Ymir Knight situation. They had so much talent going for them, and with Brian Wright playing so well, and that defense, no matter what they did on offense, that defense gave them a shot every single game. And you could probably go back and look at the last 7 years of his tenure there and say the same thing, that no matter what the offense did, the defense kept them in games. And once the offense got rolling, it was just all she wrote.
All right, so that was story number 7. So we talked about the champion in class 3. We talked about the champion in class 1. So story number 8, top story, is about Wilmington Friends. Certainly the fact that they won a championship for the first time since 1984, when their head coach, Rob Tattersall, was only 12 years old.
Yes.
But more so, the story is about the Tattersalls. And, it's a story that flies under the radar for a lot of people. If you live in Kent and Sussex County, you know the story about Bob Tattersall because he's the all-time winningest coach in the state of Delaware. But you don't necessarily relate that, hey, that's his son playing, and that's his grandson playing quarterback. Oh, and by the way, it's his other grandson who plays also at wide receiver, who will probably play quarterback next year, from what we understand. And so, Bob Tattersall's won 331 games. Rob has now won 13. So he's still got a long ways to go to catch up to his father. And so it's just a neat story. Bob played baseball at the University of Delaware and was offered an assistant job at Wilmington Friends. And that's how he stopped playing. From what I understand, he stopped playing baseball at Delaware to take this assistant job. And boom, there he is all these years later. Rob, the son and now the head coach, also played football at the University of Delaware. And so it's just a neat story. And Robbie's the 3-way player, and he's another one. You knew he was getting the ball and nobody could figure out how to stop him. And so he's a talented kid. He's 6'5". He's going to Yale. Ironically, he's slated to play wide receiver there. Which I have no question that he won't be able to.
No, you can put him anywhere, I think, at this point, and he'd be successful. We talked about during our last podcast, or second to last podcast, was it was 1984. They won in an upset over Claymont. A lot of people were upset because at the time, the way the tournament teams were chosen, week schedules played a part, and everybody said, well, I went back and looked at the articles. They shouldn't be in. Oh, they got past Dickinson. Oh, big deal. They'll get beat by Claymont, and they win the state title. Of course, they haven't won a state title since, but then this year, man, it was just utter domination for Rob Tattersall, the head coach. He's off to a good start in chasing his dad,
Yeah.
and Robbie Tattersall, it's amazing, as you said, and it's a little different from the McConomy and the Ymir Knight situations, because with Robbie Tattersall, there was no handing off or passing to someone most of the time. There was taking the snap and driving forward. Their offensive line, and even in that title game against Caravel, and I know I picked Friends, but I really thought the Caravel defense was going to force them to be a little more less vanilla than Robbie Tattersall left, right, and middle. I said they had three aspects of their offense. It's Tattersall right, left, and middle, and they couldn't. That offensive line was incredible, and Tattersall was able to find the openings. And then, in the times when he had to drop back, it's a bullet pass to someone who's open in the flat or whatever. But yeah, almost 1,000 yards rushing, over 1,000 yards passing. They were just loaded from Andrew McKenzie, Hudson Zawadkis, Jaden Willie, Phil Crock, Ishmael Dobson. They had all these guys who made these great contributions. They were, when you get past Tattersall running the ball and you look deeper and you see the offensive line play and then you see the defensive play. I mean, they held Archmere and Howard to their season low in points.
Right.
It's not like they escaped anyone during this run. This was just a phenomenal job, and it was so great. The picture, and it might have been in the News Journal, of the three generations of the Tattersalls was so great. And as you said, the younger brother is probably going to be the quarterback next year, which is Ryan Tattersall. Who played free safety this year and had a few interceptions and
second team all district.
Yeah,
second team all district as a sophomore.
So the Tattersall line continues. The night one ends this year for Smyrna. The Tattersall line will continue here for a little while longer. And just a great accomplishment. And what a cool holiday that Thanksgiving that family must have had, with all these great football minds and great football players around the table. So, and it'll be cool. I'm excited to see, once we heard from his family saying, like, well, he's actually going to Yale as a wide receiver. You and I are like, where did that come from? But again, neither one of us doubts he'll be successful no matter where they put him.
David Sills. Remember David Sills?
That's right. Who would have ever thought
he was going to be
the All-American
next
West
Tom
Virginia.
Brady? And now he's playing wide receiver for
there
the
you
Giants.
go. So you never know. But a great season for the Tattersalls, and it's so cool to see a family that really no one has anything bad to say about.
No,
that's another thing too, is they seem to do everything with class. And that's excellent. It just adds to the story.
Yeah, it sure does. They're going to lose 11 seniors. Looking at their roster and how many seniors are on there, and of course we mentioned Robbie's heading to Yale, and Ryan will probably be the starting quarterback next year as a junior, and you got to think he's going to be just as effective as his brother. And you wonder if the offense is going to change. It's not like you said, Marty, it wasn't, are they going to pass or run? It's, are they going to run left, right, or up the middle? And so it'll be interesting to see if that changes. And, you got two pretty good coaching minds on that staff.
I love the quote his dad had about, and I forget what it was, but basically like, you don't want to use me, but if you need me, I'm there.
It's like insurance. Yeah.
There you go.
That's what
right.
it was. Yeah. We said
that was one of the quotes of the year. I love that.
That was hilarious. And that's the way Bob's always been. He was, I had to drag out of him one time how many wins he had. I forget it was, and I forget the conversation. It was last year or something. And when we say Robbie's got 13 wins, that's assuming that when Bob sat out that one season or half a season, he missed. And obviously they won a bunch of games. We're assuming that Bob got credit for those wins because he was the head coach in title and still listed. I don't think Robbie cares either way, quite frankly.
I don't either.
But no, the quote was great. And I would assume Bob's coming back for at least 2 more years, as long as his grandson will be the associate head coach. And it's just a great story. That Marty, that would have been, if you and I could have gone to Thanksgiving dinner, that would have been one of those things they could have auctioned off. And I would have paid. Hey, come have Thanksgiving dinner with the Tattersalls the weekend before the state championship game.
Just the minds at that table. Yeah. It's a great, I imagine, man, you soak up more knowledge and then, just sitting having coffee with them guys than any other time.
And I got to give the mom a quote, Shannon Tattersall. I've reached out to her on Facebook a couple times to answer some questions. I didn't want to bother her husband during playoff time, and she got right back to me. And that's where I found out about the college, that her husband Rob played football at University of Delaware, that type of thing. So thanks to her for always being there when we reach out. So
and you and I are different, because I did reach out and bother Bob when I needed stats, or Rob when I needed stats for this. I was like, come on, man, you guys are the best team in the state. We need some numbers here.
That's funny. So anyway, all right. So that was story number 8, a great feel-good story, and a feel-good story that ended with a state championship. That would have been a great story even if they had lost the state championship. The fact that they won it made it even that much better. So, all right, story number 9, St. Mark's moving on up to Class 3 from Class 2. As we mentioned, Laurel moving up, and Odessa also moving up from 1 to 2 as well. And Odessa's doing it. They're expecting 1,200 students this year. So people are like, Jesus, why the heck aren't they up in Class 3? They're heading to Class 3. There's no doubt about it. This is their first senior class, so they're still only playing. They've only played so far with 3 classes, so you can call that a disadvantage if you want or whatever. But they asked to move up. And of course, the committee jumped all over that. The committee didn't deny
anybody who wanted to go up went up, and that was one team, and that was
right.
Odessa.
So they wanted to go up. Laurel wasn't going to fight it because they knew it was happening.
Yep.
St. Mark's fought it. Matt Smith, the athletic director, who's on the DIAA committee, he gave his side of the story as to why they shouldn't move up. He's not opposed to them moving up in the future, but he wanted them to still. He felt they needed 2 more years to do so. They're going to have about 900 plus enrolled in those next 2 years, but somebody had to move up. And so, when it came down to it, they were looking at St. Mark's, Newark, Howard, and Sussex Tech, and they were the 4 teams that they felt could move up. And what they looked at is that St. Mark's had a higher winning percentage, a larger roster size. They had the most playoff wins against those other 2 teams head to head. And they also beat Newark this year, and they beat Newark last year, or Howard, excuse me, beat Howard last year in the playoffs, and they beat Newark this year, albeit in overtime in week 3.
And they started
they had
the
a
year
depleted schedule
by beating the future 3A District 1 champion in Apo. So it was a hard argument to make, but Matt Smith, he did try to make it. And just real quick too, by the way, I understand Matt Smith is dealing with some health issues, so I want to send out best wishes to him. I heard from a good source of mine that he's been battling some problems. So best wishes to Matt, who's been a phenomenal athletic director and baseball coach. There. But Matt made the argument, which I guess you really have to make when you're in his position. And this, it was funny because it almost struck me as this was one of the first times they were hearing this, which was odd, or at least the first time he got to publicly talk about it. But when I looked at St. Mark's roster, and I've some family on St. Mark's, and I was in contact with them, and I said, look, you guys are complaining, I understand, but you're not losing, they're losing Luke Watson, obviously, who's going to Temple, and they're losing some other pieces, but both quarterbacks are coming back. A number of the running backs are coming back. Some of the wide receivers that were getting a lot of time are coming back. And on the lines, they've still got a lot of people coming back. I said, I personally think you guys are going to be in contention for one of those 8 playoff spots. They may not get it because, let's face it, when St. Mark's, when the fan base first heard about this, and I read through some of the messages again last night that I got, was, is this a joke? Or they really think we're going to compete with Smyrna and Middletown? No, they don't. Not at first.
No.
But you're good enough to where you will get there, because St. Mark's, boy, their story is a great one in terms of enrollment, the rebound from when, St. Elizabeth's and them took a huge hit a few years ago. Both have rebounded, not like St. Mark's has. St. Elizabeth has not rebounded to the extent St. Mark's has. And they continue to win the Best Private School of the Year award, which is one funny note, by the way. They always put the banner up right outside of Abyssinia Stadium, which is I love. It's just that little needle of the rivalry. Now, of course, they're thinking, crap, we got to play these guys every year again. They ended that series because St. Mark's was getting blown off the field every time. So
welcome back.
There you go. That's right. I'm sure Sally's just say, yeah, go ahead, put your banner up there. We'll see you on the football field. And Joey Wright has done a great job with this program. This was their best record since 2012 when they went 8-2. We all thought, I remember you and I, when they made the move from Division I to Division II, we thought they're going to dominate. They didn't. The enrollment took a huge hit. The numbers went down, and they started to come back up. Joey Wright has done a phenomenal job there. You could argue that their offense, the way it's built, suffered tremendously in that just horrible weather game against Friends. And I made a ton of jokes about Robbie Tattersall. The way he looked at the end of that game was just classic. That was like a John Madden football game that he would have loved. But I think
they chose to play. St. Mark's chose to play in that game, right? I mean, it was on their field, and nobody would have argued if they said, look, we're going to wait and play this tomorrow.
Right. This is too bad. We're going to chew up this field. And it did get chewed up. I will say that. But it's a great job by Joey Wright. St. Mark's had a great season, and I think they're going to be right in the mix next year for a playoff spot at the 3A level.
Yeah, and when I kind of look at it, I saw them. I was on the sideline when they played Appoquinimink at the beginning of the year. When they walk on the field, they look like a Class 3 team.
They do.
And if you look at those 4 teams, Newark, Howard, Sussex Tech, and St. Mark's, and you just watched each of them warm up in their half of the field, and you said, well, which one of those is your Class 3 team next year? Everybody would point to St. Mark's.
Yep.
I mean, they're big. They're physically big. Their roster's big. They're very skilled. And, the reality of it was, and as an aside, congratulations to Dave Collins and the committee that put this whole plan together.
It's not easy to
it's
do.
not easy, and not everybody's going to be happy, and it's not popular.
Yes,
but it had to be done. They wanted 12 teams, as he said. There had to be an even number of teams in each of the classes.
Yes.
And now there's 12-3, 18-2, and 16-1 for this system to work.
And all of them will now have 8 playoff teams.
Right. And so the schedule's better. Everybody's playing. There's been basically a bye week the past 2 years for one of the classes. Two of the classes, because class 2 was the only team that had to play that extra weekend. And so that's been eliminated. And so it's just, it's just interesting when they flush this out every 2 years. And that's just the reality of it. They used to do this when it was just 1 and 2. So it's not like all of a sudden, wow, why are you guys doing this? Well, they've been doing it for years. It's just more, it's paid closer attention to, because this is the first time it's been done with these 3
And the
classes.
difference is they didn't used to use on-field results, which
Right.
are now part of the process. It all used to be totally based on enrollment.
Exactly.
Where you'd have teams going up and down, and now they're factoring in on-field performance. And by the way, to that point, because I don't want to leave out Odessa, people may look at Odessa that don't know the story and say, well, they went 8-12 over the last 2 years. Why the heck are they moving up? They went 3-7 and then 5-5. It's because of what you pointed out. Their first season was nothing but freshmen and sophomores.
Right.
Last year was freshman, sophomore, and junior. Now they're going to have their first senior class. And if you look at the on-field product, the wins and losses may not be there yet, but they're getting there.
Yeah.
And they're drawing more and more kids to the program. And their roster size is great. The kids they have coming out, the size of it is great. Coach Dan Pritchard has done a great job putting this all together. It's not easy working with the small number of classes,
right?
So this is a team that is on the rise, and everybody that knows anything about football in Delaware will tell you that they are on the track, as you said, to 3A at some point. Their size and their on-field performance, the on-field performance is going to catch up to the size as these classes start to roll over.
And there may not be in the playoffs this year in class 2. I would bet my house they're in the playoffs the following year in class 2. And because like you said, the enrollment's only going to go up. Marty, the only place left to build houses in the MOT area is on the east side of Route 13. And that means you're going to Odessa. And so their enrollment's going to go up. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So St. Mark's going up. We'll see how it happens. See how they do. We don't see how it happens. It happened. We'll see how they do once they're up there. Like I said, if I was a betting man, I might bet that they're in the playoffs rather than not in the playoffs next year. But time will tell.
That's right.
We'll go from there. All right. Story number 10, the final one, is a look really ahead to next year inadvertently, because there's 3 coach openings that we know of. And I reached out to John Wilson, and thanks for him always getting right back to me. And he said, nope, these are the only 3 I know about. And that's Caesar Rodney, Hodson, and Mount Pleasant. Of course, Caesar Rodney, Dan Kindler resigned after 8 years at the helm of that program, 23 total on staff, including the year they won the state championship back in 2008, I believe it was. Frank Moffitt Jr. retires after 20 years, longest tenure coach at Hodson. And Randy Holmes retired after 20 years as the head coach at Mount Pleasant, 25 total in his case as well. So 3 openings. And what's interesting, Marty, is that if those openings had happened, in Hodson's case, let's say it's 3 or 4 years ago, Caesar Rodney maybe 5 or 6 ago, Mount Pleasant, I'll leave out of this scenario for a second, those 2 positions would have been coveted.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Would
The
have been
success of those
coveted.
programs. Yep.
It was unbelievable. Instead, Caesar Rodney's 1-19 in this 2-year in this class 3 system. Hodson 3-17, and Mount Pleasant 9-9 in class 2. So Mount Pleasant actually the most successful. And so, and it's not that those aren't coveted jobs. The reason we're talking about that is because they kind of really are coveted jobs. CR and Hodson certainly. Mount Pleasant, and this is nothing against Mount Pleasant, but when you think about Delaware football, you don't think about Mount Pleasant.
No, they're always going to be in that 9-9.
Yeah,
realm
exactly.
Over 2 seasons.
Yeah, their goals kind of be to be the best of the 3 Brandywine school district teams, which they were this past
and
year.
They competed for a playoff bid. They were in it until the last 2 weeks. So that's where they're going to live. Yes, most likely.
And so, that's the reality of it. But these 3 positions are all going to be filled. That have not been filled yet, despite the disappointment of some people of, hey, in this day and age, it's kind of like keeping a college job open 2 months after the season.
Yeah, you're right.
You're losing players. You know? And you're losing players because with school choice, kids can go anywhere now. You don't need
Right.
that. You don't need that fake apartment somewhere to play. You just need the approval of the Board of Education and be accepted to the school you're choosing into, not the Board of Education, but
Yep.
be accepted into the school you're going into, and you can go play anywhere. That's the reality of it this day and age. But so let's start with the Hodson job.
Yep.
It's no secret that assistant coach and athletic director Dave Collins would like that job. I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't hire him.
I was going to say, it's not like this guy has no resume.
Right. And they'd be, he was part of the state championships.
Yep.
Frank Moffitt won 4 state championships. Dave played at Hodson. He understands the program. And nobody's going to come in with a better idea of how to change them from going 3-17 to getting on the other side of the winning record than him. You can't, Hodson's the type of program because you pull from everywhere in Newcastle County. And I'm sure they pull some kids from Maryland who, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but they also have a disadvantage in that once you start after your sophomore year in whatever high school you're at, you can't check into Hodson. Because you've already, or Howard or Delcastle
or St. George's,
or St. George's, right? That also because your pathway's already been created, and so that's a huge disadvantage for them. They don't have an all-state running back moving into their program for their senior year, and so nobody understands that better than Dave Collins.
And you know what? Add to that too the disadvantage that's going to be built in. They're now going to be road warriors for the next 2 years. They're without a home field.
At least,
yes. Yeah, we know how construction goes and the weather and stuff like that. So,
and they're going to play at Caravel, just as an aside.
I
did confirm that the football team is not sure about the other fall sports yet, but football.
So it's going to be interesting to see how to manage that. I'm guessing they're not going to have a practice field of their own, so they're going to have to go somewhere, whether it's Caravel or wherever, to practice as well. So. There's a unique set of challenges with this job, as you pointed out, the school stuff, and then now being on the road for at least the next 2 years. So, and let's face it, Dave Collins would be a great choice. I think I was on DE Preps a few weeks ago, and I advocated for him because I think, again, the challenges that they face, and a guy who knows, as the athletic director, knows the ins and outs of this program, would seem to be a perfect fit. So, we'll see what happens from there.
And I do think they are going to be able to practice at home. He did tell me, because I put this as a story in my Newark Post stories to watch column this week coming up. And what he said is that the fall sports will only be displaced for games.
Okay.
So I'm assuming that includes the football team.
Right.
But if that's wrong, I'll find out from him and we'll correct that. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. So, that's a gimme. I mean, if they're not going to hire him, there's got to be questions raised. I mean, there's and why they're waiting this long either. Because some football players are trying to figure out where they're going to vote tech school next year. Should I go to St. George's, Delcastle, Howard, or Hodson? Well, Hodson's the one without a football coach right now. I don't know who I'd be playing for. That could be a problem. So,
and Frank Moffitt has always had a strong staff. And my guess is, and I'm not going to speak for Dave certainly, but my guess is continuity. If Dave is there, would be a huge part of this, where these players would still have these guys who do such a great job still on staff. So I can't imagine that there's a different way to go here that would be as successful or as popular really as putting Dave as the head coach. So
and the latter may be more important than the former in this case. Certainly being successful is a plus. But again, right now Hodson's not looking to win a state championship in the next 2 years. They're looking to get back to a 500 record.
Yeah, they want to be competitive against these teams.
Be competitive. So kids want to come to their school. It goes back to if you're not going to win games, it's even harder to recruit. Nobody recruits in Delaware. Ha ha. But it's even harder.
Twitter Phil on that
That's one. Right. It's hard to get students to get excited to come to your program when your record's whatever it is over the last couple of years, not just for Hodson, for any of the programs that we've talked about. So that one should be a gimme. All right. So let's go to let's talk about Pleasant. I have no clue who's going to be the head coach of Mount Pleasant.
I don't either. This is, again, I think they're a program that's going to sort of live on that 500 edge. There may be seasons where they do a little bit better, somewhere they do a little bit worse, but that class 2 is such a difficult district. There's so many good teams lumped in, and let's face it, that's the way it was built. You get the top teams in 3, teams that struggle with numbers maybe a little bit in 1, and then the teams that are, they got a bunch of them stuck in 2 that are all going to be very highly competitive. So if you're Mount Pleasant and, let's face it, they didn't, their track record on coaching hires recently isn't the best, starting with their dismissal of Lisa Sullivan as the head basketball coach on the boys'
They wanted to
side.
go in a different direction.
Yeah, well, they did, and it was down.
Wasn't to the playoffs.
No, it wasn't
for the first time in 10 years. Or
yes,
whatever.
that was interesting. Let's hope that the administration is a little more headsy with their football pick. Randy Holmes, by the way, I dug deep into their stuff. He's done a phenomenal job there for the resources and the kids that he gets.
Yeah.
So, he's a guy that may fly under the radar in coaching changes and retirements and stuff, but Randy Holmes did a great job at Mount Pleasant. So, happy retirement and great job to him. But yeah, I'm the same way. I've kind of put out feelers to people, and there's no clue as to who is getting this job, which would lead me to believe it may be an assistant that maybe works in the building that they're going to go to next, again, for maybe continuity's sake more than anything.
And that might be a school where it's more important than ever to have somebody who's in the building.
Yes.
Which Randy was.
Yeah.
At least to my knowledge. I know he was at one point. I assume he was throughout his career, and that might be, so that might play into exactly what you're saying. It may be somebody in the building who's been on staff. So, all right. So let's talk about Caesar Rodney.
This is the wild card job. This could be this could be a sleeping giant if they get the right person in there. The numbers you and I heard, it was somewhere north of 100 that they had come out for football last year. So the program is healthy in terms of numbers of kids. Somewhere along the line, and this is no disrespect to Dan Candelora, because he did a great job in different aspects of this program, and they did win at different times. But there was something over the last 2 years just didn't work, just didn't click. And I give him credit for stepping down when he did, maybe recognizing that, okay, we do need a different direction here. I do think that this is the term that keeps coming to my head all the time is a sleeping giant, where this is a team, if they get the right system, the right coaching staff, they could be a contender in not that very long. They kind of remind me of Cape Henlopen in that way. They bring in Mike Frederick, and all of a sudden they're a contender throughout most of the season for a playoff spot. I don't think Caesar Rodney is that far off if they can get the right person in there.
Yeah, the Cape example is a perfect one. Let's say the people that Mike Frederick replaced were good football coaches. They were good football coaches. And so there just wasn't the click. And maybe that's the term. There wasn't the click. There wasn't, and there was I don't know if there wasn't a loss for the excitement of Cape football, but there wasn't the pizzazz that there was this year with a new coach. Now, we'll see what Mike does next year. If they don't make the playoffs again next year, then you start thinking about, hey, maybe maybe he's not the answer for whatever reason. But I like Mike Frederick, and I've said that
I think that program is going in the right direction.
I love how he coaches. Kid gets an unsportsmanlike conduct, he comes to the bench. Doesn't matter what it was for, and he gets lectured on his way over, type of thing. So and that's not just the only reason I like him. But yeah, but I would have loved to have my kid play for Dan Candelora in any sport. He's a great tennis coach. A lot of people don't know that. Very close to winning the state championship last year. He's a great tennis coach.
I was going to say, I haven't heard negative things about him as well off the field. So
so anyway, Dan's a great guy and a great coach. A lot of these guys are great coaches even when they don't win. That's the bottom line. But yeah, I don't know. Rod Milstead, the former Del State coach, his name's out there. He hasn't gotten a job anywhere else.
The
Bell,
DIAA guy, who was a great coach, by the way.
Great coach.
Sean Strickland at Milford, I've heard his name tossed around. I do think that this, in its own way, may end up being the most popular job that coaches are after because of the infrastructure in place, the number of kids. The school has always had good kids, and it's been an athletically successful school in a number of different sports. So I think if the right person walks in there and puts in the right system, this could be a team on the rise very quickly. And I think it's incumbent on Caesar Rodney, and I think the higher ups there realize this, that they can't bring a nobody into this program. It's got to be somebody who's probably been a head coach, but not only been a head coach, been a successful head coach. And a big part of that success being that they didn't lose kids. In other words, the kids got excited to come play football for that coach, similar to what happened at Cape. And that's, and we'll see that next year. It'll be interesting to compare the numbers of kids that tried out for football at Cape this year compared to next year, because the football program, the excitement in that program is at an all-time high right now. And so
that'll be interesting.
Which, to your point, even more than Hodgson, I think CR needs to get on the stick and name a head coach.
I don't disagree.
I mean, I really thought both of those jobs would be filled by the new year.
Yeah.
That was just something I thought with the off-season programs that these schools run now, where, again, the coaching out of season you can't do, but the weight programs and stuff they set up for these kids.
Yep.
You got to get this stuff. This stuff doesn't happen overnight.
They start Tuesday, those weight programs.
Yes,
they start Tuesday, right. January 3rd.
And they come back from, that's right. They come back from break.
And here's what we do know, because we just know it, and it's no secret, that it's not the athletic directors and often not the principals that hold this process up. It's the board of directors, because whoever is named the head coach has to be approved by the board of directors. So they're not going to, and you know what? All three of these schools may have a name that's going to their board of directors meeting in January,
right,
to be approved.
You're right. That's a great point.
They're not going to make that public.
Calendar.
They're not going to make that public, and that's the reality of it. So anyway, so it's going to be interesting. Three spots that are going to be filled, and so the Hodson's coach has been there 20 years. Mount Pleasant's coach has been there 20 years. CR's coach has been there 23 years. So this is a rare case where we've got three teams that have basically been coached by the same person, or at least the same type of staff makeup, and in two cases the same person, for 20 plus years. That's a whole generation of kids.
That's pretty neat.
Those spots are going to be filled. That's pretty neat. So anyway, so that's it. That's our top 10 stories. Real quick again, AI DuPont not fielding the team. The schedules that were altered, because of incidents on the field, off the field, around the field in some cases, and the shortage of referees, the tremendous amount of field goal kickers compared to most years. The two Class 3A surprises, Apo winning District 1 and Dover making it to the state championship. Not a complete surprise other than this kind of sway they had at the end of the season where they lost 3 out of the 4, which made them a surprise. The first ever unified overtime game, not only in the state title game, but in the playoffs at all. Laurel domination, which gets them up to Class 2. Smyrna domination, unfortunately for everybody in Class 3, keeps them in Class 3. The 3 generation of Tattersalls winning the state championship. More importantly, the human interest story behind it, of how wonderful that is for that family. Story number 9, St. Mark's moving up a class. And then 10, the 3 coaching openings. So it really was a tremendous year for Delaware High School football in a lot of ways. And it's a new era as we move into this second phase of this class system.
I was just going to say, this is going to be a really interesting year, because it's the first time they've made adjustments based on results on the field and enrollment mixed together for the first time, that they've altered it from the original plan. So they're hoping, and I know listening to Dave Collins, that they hope, soon, within the next few years, to have teams as closely in the district and the class they should be as possible. And again, kudos to his team for putting that together. And I hope that people love the fact that, on New Year's Day, they're going to be able to listen to some cool football stuff about high school football in Delaware. You thought it was over. Guess what? We're back.
And our plan is, as we said at the end of our official end of the season podcast back in December, our plan is to pop on the air and drop a podcast when there's a reason to. We're not just going to talk, and bore you with stuff that, isn't news. We're all about Delaware High School football news, and that's what we're all a part of. And so one of the things I know we plan to do is, as soon as these 3 coaching hires are made, we're going to get all 3 of these coaches on the podcast to talk to them. And so I think that's something that would interest people, not only within those schools, but statewide, because they are two of the 3 are very big shoes that are being filled. Not shoes, that's the wrong term. Positions being filled. And as we said with Mount Pleasant, that's a major team up here in the Newcastle area public school systems. And so that is going to be a big deal as well. So we'll get all 3 of those coaches on the podcast. But until then, we hope everybody had a wonderful, happy holiday season. Depending on when you're listening to this, Happy New Year. That's another podcast in itself, Marty. When do I stop saying Happy New Year to people?
I know.
Like, is it January 3rd or is it January 15th? It's something we'll save that for when we're really looking for news and stuff. But so we hope you enjoyed this top 10 stories of the Delaware High School football season in 2022. We can't wait to be back on the air every week next week when the season kicks off, but we will be in the meantime as well. So we'll send it out on social media to be on the lookout. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, please do that. That's the easiest way to get them delivered right to your phone. You don't have to worry about whether you missed one or not.
That's it.
We appreciate all your support. Happy holidays and Happy New Year to everyone.